Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and I'm delighted to be joined here in the studio by Jonathan Dog Mackenzie. Hi, John.
Hello!
Guten Tag, Herr Stafford-Bloor. Wie geht's du?
Guten Tag, Herr Devine. Me case is good.
Yes, a couple of lovely pearlies there. And speaking of pearlies, delighted to be joined by the angelic presence of newsman Amitai Winehouse. Hi, Amitai.
Hi, Joe.
How's it going?
Yeah, good. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. He's a newsman. Yeah?
What happens to the news when you're on? It just stops.
I was wondering that.
We've got other news people.
Good.
Oh. Not as crucial as he led us to believe, sounds like. I do know 4 or 5 other news people as well. And you're one of the better ones, but maybe not the best.
I'm not going to ask you to rank and rate the news people.
That's good because I can't remember everyone's name. Anyway, we're joined by Amitai Winehouse, newsman. Amitai, let me ask you a question, because at this point in the podcast, I'd like to promote The Athletic. And normally we spend time talking on here about the long reads, some of which are too long for a child like me. You know, they're very detailed and good if you're an adult and enjoy reading. But for me, I want to get to the heart of the matter often. And I find that that's what you provide and your team for The Athletic. What is it that you're doing on a daily basis?
So we deal with the reporters and the stories they have that they get from the contacts they speak to, and we just help them turn it into breaking news stories, basically.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly intense sometimes and incredibly fun. And then we also help the long reads that you choose not to read come together as well.
Yeah, I like to watch the news channels sometimes to see the journalists say, go with the story. No, wait. No, go. No, wait, go. And enjoy thinking about the news team struggling under all of that weight. Now, let me just have a look at what the most recent news stories on the app are on this bank holiday. Man United reached an agreement to pay a guaranteed €95 million for Antony. We may come to discuss that a little bit later. What else have we got on here? Oh, Chelsea rethinking the Aubameyang move. I didn't know they were thinking it, but I have been on holiday, so, there's that.
If you want to imagine the news desk, it's like someone stood at a machine and shouting, stop the presses, start the presses, stop the presses, over and over again.
A stressful working environment, a bit like being next to JJ when he's a cold face. Yeah. Seb wouldn't know about that. Okay, anyway, that's The Athletic. You can visit theathletic.com/Tifo, theathletic.com/Tifo for, I believe, a 30-day free trial. Try it for free. If you don't like Amitai's work, just send him a message about it and then leave. That's fine. He welcomes that. He does. But for now, I will leave you in the warm hands and the cool embrace of Amitai Winehouse, the newsman. I like saying newsman.
Why are you saying mun?
I don't know, it's funny.
You're going to say Man United in this episode.
Let us begin. Where else would we begin than with Brighton? I mean, there are other places, but Brighton are 3rd in the league. Good gracious, 3rd in the league after a 1-0 victory over your sacred Leeds, Amitai. Did you watch that game?
I did watch the game.
Yeah, what did you think about it?
So I actually had, someone asked me this morning, they were like...
They're 4th. Thank you, Steve Hankles.
Someone this morning said to me, were Brighton good to watch then?
Yeah.
And I realised that they must be good to watch. People always say they're good to watch, but it's a bit like Radiohead for me, in that people always tell me they're good, but I just can't be bothered to understand.
This analogy
really
is not going to wash here. You've
really
come to the wrong
Radiohead.
place to use Radiohead for a mediocrity analogy.
No. I don't think Radiohead is mediocre.
What are you saying?
I'm saying that...
Make it absolutely clear what you're saying.
I'm saying I don't know if I have the energy to care about Brighton.
Sure.
And in the same way as Radiohead.
It takes us a sort of sophisticated kind of energy. Not everybody has it.
Energy.
But yeah, I did watch the game. They are very good.
Yeah.
And Graham Potter is clearly really, really good.
One of the top ones. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about managers shortly, but on Brighton specifically, John, I know you talked about it last week. I didn't see the game. I saw this on Match of the Day, and it struck me that Pascal Gross and Leandro Trossard they looked amazing.
Yeah, I think the thing about Graham Potter, and this is what I talked about last week on the podcast, is that he is a manager who can deconstruct what an opposition manager is trying to do and cause problems for that. I suppose people always laugh at me banging on about Marcelo Bielsa, but he had a system where he was able to get the best out of his players because he was able to do various things. And I feel as though Graham Potter is the same kind of manager. So he is able to get players like Leandro Trossard and Pascal Gross, both of whom I really like. But I think he is able to get them into those situations where you can get the best upside out of them and avoid those situations where you might get their downside. And this was again evidence in the Leeds game, is that if you looked at the way, so Leeds press in a very specific way. Graham Potter had clearly watched the tape, realised that there were certain situations where Leeds, what they tend to do in a press is they'll try and force the opposition to one side, and they'll have a really aggressive man-for-man press, and they'll push their fullback really high up. And what Brighton were doing was they were trying to force these sorts of situations, move the ball across, and then target the remaining three Leeds defenders in their back line. So the fullbacks pushed up, and then there's only three. And so they were trying to go 3-on-3 and then get the ball forward quickly, just make the most of those sorts of situations. It's just little things like that where he clearly knows what Leeds are going to be trying to do in different phases of play. And so he targets them, and he does things that will cause them problems in those moments. So just a really smart way of playing football. And obviously, like, he doesn't have the greatest talent base. I think Leeds starting 11 was cost 100 million more or something than the Brighton starting 11. But actually, if you watch particularly the first half, it didn't look that way. And so, yeah, he's a manager who gets the most out of his team. And I as a tactical nerd, I like that.
Yeah. Seb, a member of the team that Potter's getting the most out of at the moment is Danny Welbeck. Now, Hankels and I were talking about this beforehand. Danny Welbeck, a player who's not immune from injury, as we know. Perhaps that's something that could afflict him throughout the course of the season. If it doesn't, though, I mean, is he in with a shout for the World Cup for England? What do you think?
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up, because I thought so too, just because I still associate him with kind of being a defensive forward in a way, and like an incredibly selfless player. And if you look at England's options at the moment, I know that you've got a lot of sort of three-dimensional players there, but very few who'd think, right, we've got a leading position, winning position, let's defend it, let's have somebody that's comfortable receiving, passes into the channels, who can kind of play in those sort of areas. I don't know whether this is a kind of a failing of kind of England's production system, but they still haven't really produced another player like that. And it'd be nice. What a nice way to not end his career, because he's not ready to retire and he's still got a good couple of years ahead of him. But what a nice way to kind of to return to what he was in the kind of the psyche of English football, because he's played so well for Brighton, and selflessly as well. Like you talked about Pascal Gross playing very well. I thought Alexis McAllister. So do you do the stop between the two bits? Is that the right way to do it? Or do we just go with McAllister?
So he's
I'm looking at a Mac here.
He's an Argentinian, right? And at some point, one of his ancestors was actually Scottish. So
sure.
I presume it's just McAllister, but for some reason they've introduced a space.
I thought he was great as well. And I didn't necessarily think he could play in a two. I think he played sort of a two with Caicedo at the weekend. And a lot of this has to do with what Welbeck's willing to do with and without the ball. And I think that's a real testament to kind of not only like his quality, but his durability, because that's been the issue. Last couple of years at Arsenal, at Watford, like that's been the problem. You just can't rely on him to play 30 games. And now all of a sudden he looks 25 again, actually.
Well, this is the first full pre-season he's had in ages, apparently, he said in the BBC interview. And of course, also recently signed a new contract with Brighton until 2024. Facts that I know off the top of my head. Thanks, Steve. Anyway, thank you, Seb. We were talking before, John, about how Graham Potter is a good manager, and that led us to a conversation about the quality of coaching in the league generally, as opposed to 5 or 10 years ago. I had a look at the list the other day to see how old some managers were. I was surprised to see that Arteta was the youngest. I thought it was someone else. But in doing that, I looked at the list, and short of a few names that we don't necessarily need to mention, it's unbelievable. Like the quality of coaching, the level of coaching. There are very few teams where you couldn't say that coach is an excellent coach in comparison to 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, even take, for example, the promoted sides like Marco Silva coaching Fulham. Previously has been the Everton manager, was happy to take that job down in the Championship and get them promoted. That's an incredible level of promotion coach candidate. Just top to bottom, like, you have to be a good coach now. You cannot get away with it in the way that you used to in the past.
I think relative new additions as well, not just this year, but in the last few years. Obviously, we've talked about Graham Potter already. Thomas Frank has been amazing. Ralph Hasenhüttl still sometimes is a little confusing. I think, I saw you tweeting about that over the weekend. Perhaps we can talk about that another time. Patrick Vieira has been really exciting so far. Anyway, we thought we'd have a look at the list from 10 years ago just to see the difference and play a little guessing game. Seb, I think you'll probably be quite good at this guessing game.
Because you're so old, Seb.
Because of your age and memory.
That was very unkind. You've been on holiday for 2 weeks and you come back with that.
John said the age thing. I just followed it up.
but
simply-
you said it with a massive smile. That's not the same.
Yeah.
Like John was
I
up
did
front and
enjoy
direct
it.
about it. You were snide. I felt. That's all.
Seb and I know where we stand with each
Yeah,
other.
yeah.
Yeah.
always just-
Go away for
it's
2
always
weeks,
putting
and
in the knife, isn't it?
all these new
Rivalries.
forces sort of they join together, don't they?
We've
I don't like it.
unionised, I'm
Yeah.
afraid to say.
I'm back to bust this up. Anyway, Seb,
Yeah.
can you hear me? Okay.
I can. Yes.
Can you tell me who was the Fulham manager in 2012-13? Long pauses of silence.
Martin-
Excellent for podcasts.
Martin Yeo.
It was Martin Yeo. Look at him go. That was excellent, wasn't it? Okay, Amitai, you ready for me?
Yeah, go on.
Here we go. This is too easy. Who was the Sunderland manager in 2012-13?
Oh, 2012-13.
Mm.
Oh, that's actually... I don't know why I'm finding that
That's
so
sneaky
difficult.
difficult, actually.
It is
How
sneaky
old
difficult.
were you in 2012?
I was in my third year of uni, so
Okay.
I wasn't young.
He was
No
7 years
excuses
old.
then.
It's
Thanks.
not
Very
it wasn't-
smart, this
It
guy.
wasn't Steve Bruce, was it?
It wasn't Steve Bruce. It was Paolo Di Canio.
Well, I thought, yeah, he did come in.
Bit
Who
sneaky.
started the season?
I don't know. It's not on the list, Amitai. Not important. Who was the Swansea City manager? John
It's
Mackenzie.
not Gary Monk, is it?
Actually, this is quite a bad one to pick because, it was Michael Laudrup.
Oh.
You know, who again, the arguments about whether he was a
What's he
good coach or
doing
not.
these days,
I
then?
don't know
Not
what he's
coaching,
doing
I
these
don't
days.
think.
I
Not
wish I hadn't
certainly at
started
the
this
top
game. Who was the Liverpool manager?
Brendan Rodgers.
Oh yeah. I'm just picking good managers. This wasn't the point I was trying to illustrate. The point I was trying to illustrate, without sort of picking anyone specifically, there's names here. Like an Aston Villa manager was Paul Lambert. Yeah, there was Brian Kidd was the caretaker at Manchester City. That feels a very long time ago. And of course, Sir Alex Ferguson. Who the hell's that? I don't know who that is. Steve Clark. This one's gone down the toilet, hasn't it? a little bit?
I feel like
This segment.
everyone's actually turned out to be okay.
Yeah.
Like Steve Clark's having the Clark.
I think if you
Is he
went
having
back,
the Clarkisons?
the Clarkisons. Yeah, I was
Oh.
going to go for that, and then thought
It's a great board game, isn't it, Clarkisons?
But they like him, don't they?
Do they?
In Scotland? Yeah.
Where does he manage?
I think he's Scotland manager.
He's the Scotland
isn't he?
manager.
Yeah.
Yeah, they like
They
him
just
there.
failed to get the World Cup
Yeah.
place,
Oh.
to be fair. After a disappointing performance.
Sam
against-
Allardyce.
Ah,
What about
Yeah,
this
he-
one? Here we've got, do you remember Nigel Adkins? He was the Reading manager here, but I always remember him getting Southampton like back-to-back promotions and then getting fired.
I think,
Yeah.
so who are the top six managers? That's the interesting one.
The top six managers. So Chelsea is Rafa Benitez. Arsenal is Arsene Wenger. Of course, Man United is Sir Alex Ferguson. Manchester City, as I mentioned, was caretaker Brian Kidd. Who else have we got? Where's Tottenham? Andrea Villas-Boas.
Okay.
And who's the other team in the top six? Liverpool is Brendan Rodgers. Did I already say that?
But then if you go through the top six today, it's what? Pep Guardiola, Antonio Conte.
Well, if we look today, we see the two managers that have been in the league for the longest by far. In fact, they are double the tenure of the person in third. Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola have both been there for 6 years. We've got Thomas Frank at Brentford for 3 years. Arsene Hüttl, Brendan Rodgers, Graham Potter, Mikel Arteta, David Moyes, Thomas Tuchel, Marco Silva. I mean, it's very good, isn't it?
it started with I feel like it started the year that Guardiola and Mourinho ended up in the Premier League, and
Right.
it's sort of gone from there because that Conte was still at Chelsea that season, I
Yeah.
think, and like every club just had every big club
Yeah.
had like an elite level manager, and it was the first time that was the case in the Premier League.
And now it feels like the smaller teams
Yeah.
in the league all
We've
have,
squeezed out the
yeah.
dinosaurs, haven't we?
They've gone.
Like the Tony
carousel.
Pulis and
Yeah.
Although Tony Pulis was good at what he did, I suppose.
Tony Pulis served a mighty purpose.
He did.
Yeah,
But yeah, you sort of Mark Hugheses, etc.
sure.
Alan Pardew's. They've
Mark
Nigel
Hughes,
Pearson's.
Mark Hughes managing in League Two these days is just weird.
Yeah.
Well, who's he managing?
Bradford.
Bradford.
He's Bradford manager.
Yeah.
Wow.
How the mighty have fallen.
Does he like it there?
Yeah, loves it.
He loves it.
Mm.
I've always liked Bradford, to be fair. You know.
I was born in Bradford, you know.
Were you?
BRI,
BRI.
Bradford Royal Infirmary.
Oh, I just
Yeah.
think of Brighton when you say
Yeah, I
BRI.
was thinking you're doing like a postcode thing, and I was thinking
Yeah.
that's definitely not the postcode for
BRI
Bradford.
for 17.
What postcode were
Or
you
SW.
born in, Amitai?
I'm gonna say LS1,
Where's that?
Leeds.
Leeds,
LS1,
of course.
right in the middle.
I'm assuming.
the middle of
I
Leeds.
actually don't know what the postcode is for the.
Hospital.
You
LGI.
don't know the postcode for a hospital you were at
Calls
once.
himself a newsman.
Oh well. Never mind. Hankles, where were you born?
Whips Cross.
Whips
Same
Cross.
hospital as David Beckham.
Ah, yes.
He's
Just
someone who whips
a
crosses.
stone's throw from Leighton Orient there.
Very much.
There we go. That was fun, wasn't it? A trip down memory lane.
What about Seb? Where was Seb born?
Well, Seb was born, I think, in the bowels of Eton, where he wasn't born, but he was created.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and look at him now, a fine gentleman in this establishment. Well done, Seb. We're all very proud of you. Liverpool 9-0 Bournemouth. Good Lord. Seb, what on earth happened there, very briefly?
Liverpool were really, really, really good. I mean, ordinarily you would say it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. Actually, I don't know of much else Bournemouth could have done. I think also like Bournemouth had the misfortune of playing them immediately after the Manchester United game, which was ugly and which had people saying for a couple of days, Liverpool finished, Liverpool cycle's over, Jurgen Klopp is reaching. I mean, one of the topics from last week was actually, is this Jurgen Klopp's Borussia Dortmund season, Liverpool, which was a little bit jumped the gunny, but at the same time, they have been bad. They kind of struggled through the season. They've laboured through it. And this was the response to it. They look very much like a team who'd spent the last 3 or 4 days just sitting inside, digesting all the media coverage following Man United. And they were really excellent.
Yeah, the second
really,
half had
really
the feel of a team that really didn't want to stop scoring at all.
No, but then I suppose it's a novelty when form comes back like that. I've got no problem. I've seen a couple of people saying that, once you get to 6 or 7-0, do you have to score more goals? Is the kind of the courteous thing to do to put the cue in the rack, so to speak? No, not really.
No.
It's professional football.
I wanted 10.
Yeah, well, I think that's what happens. Everybody does, because that would be a Premier League landmark, wouldn't it?
Will we get 10, Amitai, do you think, at some point?
I think at some point we'll get 10, because if you sort of plot the 9-0s, they're getting more frequent, aren't they?
Yeah.
So surely you're going to get 10 at some point.
Oh, I'd love 10. That'll be a fun day, won't it?
We nearly had 10 in the Scottish Premier League yesterday.
Yeah, Celtic were also 9, weren't they?
Yeah.
9-0 against who?
Dundee United.
Dundee, poor old Dundee.
That was away as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Ooh.
What's the score at half time in that, John? Was it 6-5 or 6?
4-0.
4-0. Okay.
Well, anyway, John, Liverpool's start to the season, we haven't really spoken about it that much. Quite poor, to be honest, prior to them scoring 9 goals in one game. They've had a bit of a tricky start. I mean, we would expect them and Manchester City to kind of be out of the blocks immediately, and to a lesser extent, Manchester City have looked a little weak in some areas, but have been getting the results in a way that Liverpool haven't.
Yeah, Man City, I think, have been good. They've just sort of been the victims of weird variants. So, like, against Palace, there was that weird own goal off John Stones, and then Palace scored their second shot on target, which was a header from a corner. And for that whole game, I felt City were in control. It was just a case of when they were going to score, and obviously they got the 4 in the end. But with Liverpool, it seems to be a little bit more indicative of issues that they've got. Obviously, the big issue is injuries. They've got an injury crisis. They have spent time developing their midfield. I've made a video on IRL recently where we looked at the development of Liverpool's midfield under Jurgen Klopp, and a big part of that was Thiago, obviously, and with him not being available, that has hit them. They've also had Fabinho out as well, and other players in and out of the frame. So, and they've also got quite an aging midfield, right? If you look at some of the ages of the players that they've got, there's a few of them that are regulars who are over the age of 30, which isn't ideal. They've obviously got players like Curtis Jones and Harvey Elliott coming through as well, but you don't want to sort of have a massive gap between your starting midfield and then the ones coming through. So I think it would be interesting to see how they deal with that in terms of recruitment, because they are talking. I think Jurgen Klopp had an interview recently where he was like, I previously said we weren't going to sign anyone, but we are obviously going to sign someone. It shows you that I make mistakes. So they're definitely looking at solving that problem through bringing players in. Yeah,
well, actually, we had a question last week on the podcast from Navio. Is Frenkie de Jong a good fit for Klopp's Liverpool? Amitai, you're a newsman. I'm not really been following the Frenkie de Jong possible Liverpool connections, but are there any?
I don't think we've reported anything on that. I don't think I've seen anything along those lines. On the question of whether he's a good fit, it's in a world before Thiago played for Liverpool, I would have said no. But I feel like in when the midfield is constructed so they can get the best out of a player like that, then yes. But I don't think there's anything in that. I don't think I've seen anything about that, at least.
Would you like to see it?
Well, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
Sure. It would be quite funny, given that Man United have spent the entire window chasing him.
But that's the weird thing with De Jong, is like Barcelona I don't know. They publicly, they don't want to get rid of him. Behind the scenes, it would have been very useful this summer for them to have sold him. Manchester United really wanted him. Chelsea wanted him. It is going to be very interesting to see where he goes at some point. I don't know if it will be this window now, because I think Barcelona are basically in a position where they don't have to sell him.
Yes. Yes, they've managed to. They registered Jules Koundé the other day. I'm not quite sure how, but they did.
The deal there is that I think some members of the club's hierarchy have provided money in some way that has allowed them to temporarily get under the salary cap.
Right.
But I don't really know to what degree. I think there was a thing about how La Liga didn't particularly like it. But it's okay. It's like, all right, they've done the right thing, and they've registered this player.
It's all cool.
It's all cool. It's all gravy.
Yeah.
But like they don't. I don't know. This is not a long-term solution to their issue, basically. But none of this is. Barcelona haven't got any long-term solutions.
Yeah. Good gracious. They really need to have a good season, don't they?
I'm just wondering what the Catalonian for "it's all gravy" is. Do you reckon they have a similar one? Do you think a sauce-based?
It's all gravy.
I suspect it's probably not English with a funny accent. No.
Well,
it's all hamon. Is it hamon? Is that the
No, that's
we
that's
can all
ham, isn't
dream.
it?
Yeah. But it's all hamon. My brother recently introduced the phrase "it's all Gucci" into my life, and I said
I've heard that.
I said it's pretty constantly for 24 hours until I was told to stop.
Yeah.
Because it was getting really annoying.
Do you know, my wife said to me yesterday she'd been doing some childcare for nieces and nephews, and she said they're all really into sea shanties, and I knew that because I am on the internet, and suddenly I felt a gulf between my wife and I. She was very surprised about the sea shanties. I said it was all very last year, the sea shanty. It's reaching the 4 or 5 year olds now. Lazy meme followers. They didn't even know sea shanties were big during the pandemic. Not now. Children, hey? Anyway, if it's not De Jong, do you think Jude Bellingham could be that upgrade, John? He seems like a top football player.
Yeah, and the rumours that I've seen in Germany have been that Bellingham is the succession planning that Liverpool have been doing.
Right.
Jurgen Klopp is a fan, apparently. And it makes a degree of sense, I think. With De Jong, De Jong is quite different, I think, to Thiago. And I suppose Bellingham is as well. For me, Thiago is like a really brilliant technical passer, a really good tempo controller, which was needed for Liverpool, right? They came to Jurgen Klopp came to the league and was playing a fairly gegenpressing style. So it was a lot about, turning the ball over quickly and direct attacks. And during his time, he realised that he needed to do something to slow things down a little bit. And Thiago is definitely, you can see why he might be someone that you can bring in, because he's a player who can drop in, pick the ball up, he has la pausa, as they say in Spain. He has the ability to sort of assess the options, slow the play down, get the tempo going. Frenkie de Jong is someone who, again, he's going to drop in deep and pick the ball up, but I would see him as maybe a bit more of a ball carrier. When he was playing for Ajax, he would drive forward with the ball, and then you sort of get him on the edge of the box playing maybe through balls along the floor, whereas with Thiago, for me, it's more sort of like little dinked passes in behind, because Liverpool are coming up against shut defences all the time as well. Whereas Jude Bellingham, a bit more of a dynamic player, I would say. Not the sort of player that I would see dropping in to pick the ball up, but would maybe fit better on the other side of Liverpool's midfield, because they tend to have a more aggressive player on the right hand side. So they've been using Harvey Elliott, they've been using Jordan Henderson as well there, who is a very, very aggressive off-ball player, but also can almost join the front three and make a front four, so they almost look like they're in a 4-2-4. I could see Jude Bellingham playing in that sort of role, but Bellingham, I think, tends to play on the left. So again, I'm sure there would have to be some sort of what's the word that Jay uses, jiggery pokery in the midfield to just move everything around. But yeah, it'd be fascinating to see. I think Bellingham makes a degree of sense, because I think he is that kind of dynamic player in a way that Thiago and De Jong aren't. But then we, as Amitai said, we didn't think that Thiago would necessarily work in that midfield, but then he has. So
yeah, okay. Ham in Catalan is pernil, according to Steve Hankles.
But what's gravy?
Yeah, what's gravy?
What's gravy? Find out.
Do they have a gravy
equivalent, really?
Well, I don't think they eat gravy in Catalan. It's too hot, isn't it? Okay. But anyway, the team that scored pernil goals in this game, Catalan, was Bournemouth. Seb, a Bournemouth. Are they in trouble?
Yeah, so I'm still not sure, because I think coming up, I think it was fairly clear that they needed to strengthen. The team that they came up with didn't really have enough experience in the Premier League. It's not exactly stacked full of difference makers, is it? And
Scott Parker seems to be quite open about that in every interview as well, right?
Yeah, that's been.
I did wonder. Like, I've been watching the Arsenal All or Nothing series recently, and I'm feel more connected with how what a manager says has an impact on players. If you're a player in that squad and you keep hearing Scott Parker say we're not good enough for the league, effectively, I'm not saying he's wrong to do so or that it's the wrong approach, because clearly he needs to. He's maybe pressuring the board into signing new players. But that might have a bit of an impact on you as a player, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Also, it's a super difficult position to be in because, like, you've hit on the dual role of a head coach in that situation. You got to make sure that everybody's aware of the reality of the situation. You also got to balance your squad's morale and make sure that you're not telling integral players that they're a bit shit and they're not up to it, because that's not going to end well, is it?
Yeah.
I remember speaking to Ahmed, our Bournemouth writer at The Athletic, earlier in the summer around sensible transfers time, and he was adamant that the squad needed significant investment, and in defence there were issues around goalkeeper. Goals could potentially become a bit of a problem. I'm paraphrasing what Ahmed said. It was a couple of months ago now, and I think this is being proven. The difficulty is, though, that what do you do in this situation? Because it's very difficult if you're a player and you've seen the opening few weeks of the Premier League and someone says to you, hey, come and join Bournemouth. So let's say you're an existing Premier League player. You think, no, I'm not getting on that ship because it's already sinking, which means you either go to another target, give somebody a step up from the Football League, or you pay that player a huge amount of money and increase your liability going forward. So recruiting is difficult. It's not just a question of going, right, well, we need that player, that player, that player, that player. And if you're today, it's 29th of August, podcast releasing on the 30th, transfer window shuts in 48 hours. If you haven't got these players in now, that's concerning, because what are you doing in that last 48 hours? Surely that's the point at which you start to make your desperate moves, and when you start to kind of create situations which you don't really want to see in the kind of cold light of relegation, like financial liabilities and release clauses, that kind of jazz. Not a happy time. So I don't know. I feel like they've come up with a sort of Norwich-like attitude. Kind of a cheerful, well, we're back here, we're going to do our best and we're going to see what happens, but we're not going to do what Forrest have done, which is to not fireproof, because I still think, they've got some way to go. But they've invested very heavily in a lot of really good players who have dramatically increased their chances of surviving. Bournemouth has gone down a different road, and it doesn't look great at the moment.
Forrest have signed enough players for both clubs, haven't they? I think. So,
but Forrest have signed good players. Like, I feel like one of the things that's been lost in this Forrest conversation is that a lot of the players they've signed are really, really good.
Don't reduce it to sensible conversation, Seb. I want to enjoy making fun of a football team that signs 20 players in one summer. Is that ever sensible? This isn't on the plan. This isn't on the Hankels plan. I can see Hankels' eyes are boring into the side of my head.
He's uncomfortable.
To go to a break. He's written a joke about Catalonia, which I'm ignoring, and I'm moving straight on to a break. What a wonderful break that was. I had a lovely. Did you enjoy that break, Amitai?
That's amazing.
That's good.
I enjoyed the bit
now,
where you
Manchester City 4, 2 Crystal Palace. Hot diggity dog, Haaland, hey? What do you think?
Oh, he's great, isn't he? I always think.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen? I mean, you probably have seen. Looney Tunes, the cartoons.
No, I've never heard of that. What is that?
You've never heard of Looney Tunes?
Oh no, of course not.
Anyway, there's a giant red monster in Looney Tunes who always reminds me of Erling Haaland. I don't know why, but
which one?
The one who's covered in red hair.
The Tasmanian Devil.
No, not Taz.
Not Taz.
He's in like a couple of episodes. He chases Bugs Bunny around at one point.
I feel like on other podcasts they wouldn't take a massive pause to find out who that is. But here, Looney Tunes Red Monster. Oh, Red Monster comes up pretty quickly. Gossamer.
Yeah, well, he's not like well known, but like he's in a couple of episodes.
He's one of the minor characters in Looney Tunes.
Haaland always reminds me of this guy for some reason. He just like looks
What's
the same.
The reason? Because I can't see that at all.
Because Haaland's like this weird sort of like monster who plays up front, runs around, and for some reason he can like ghost between defenders. That was the thing that struck me on the game at the weekend. Like, how is it possible that this guy, who is the most giant striker in the Premier League, can find space between a centre-back and a right-back and then score, and it's as if no one has even spotted that he's there?
Can I say, that's the third goal, I think, when he runs in, he has the pass through. The way that his body doesn't move at all, his trajectory doesn't change when a massive centre-back clatters into his back. It's It's the best example I've seen from him so far of how much power he has, John.
Yeah, it's disgusting. That
In
goal.
some ways, he's a lot like the red monster Gossamer from Looney Tunes. Would you agree with that assessment?
Actually, the analogy I would go with is, you know in the Harry Potter films when Professor Lupin, I believe is his name.
Now we're talking.
He becomes a werewolf.
Yes,
right?
he does.
And that when he runs as
Remus
a werewolf.
Lupin.
Yeah,
Yes,
him.
yes.
Remus being the Latin word for wolf, as we all know.
Well, very literal books.
That's not even true. It's Lupus, I think. What's Remus?
He's like Romulus and Remus, who of course were raised by a wolf.
Yeah, and they are on the Roma badge, so it's got a footballing connection.
Right.
Anyway, when he runs basically as the werewolf, it's like Haaland running,
sort of leaning forwards,
yeah,
like a freight train
a little bit, which is maybe why Gossamer, because like here, look, he's a little bit like
he does do a bit of stooping, doesn't he? He brings his hands up either side of his head. Yeah,
but yeah, that goal unbelievable because the ball is played into his feet. He has no right to get a shot off there, because he's being marked, and yet he holds off one player, evades the other, and even the shot itself seems ridiculous to me because he doesn't seem to have any backlift whatsoever.
Everything is perfect. I think, it wouldn't be necessarily nominated for a goal of the season contender, but so far,
no one else could score that goal. No one else in the world could score that goal.
So good. So good. Anyway, do Manchester City have an aerial defensive frailty, Seb? I bet you weren't expecting me to ask you that.
No, I don't think so. I mean, in a way, this is kind of a Man City problem, and it's always treated as such during the year because they're used to dominating possession. Their defense is built to facilitate their dominance of possession, and there's always, anytime they concede a goal from a set piece, anytime they concede a scruffy-looking goal, or basically the goal that John Stones put through his own net, that kind of goal, it's always a kind of hang on, there's a weakness. No, it doesn't really describe a weakness. It's just an inevitability of the kind of football they play. It's the trade-off that they accept.
Sure.
Maybe could they have could they import a trio of 6'5" monoliths to play at centre back? Yes, but what do they lose as a result of that? So it's something that Pep Guardiola is not going to go scrambling into the transfer market to cure anything on the back of what happened on Saturday. That's the point.
Sure.
Palace scored 2 goals from their one shot on target by the 20th minute or something. It's just variance. It's just unlucky.
It's not something you respond to. It's just a done Palace, because Palace played pretty well and they might have had a third goal. I still don't quite know why that was ruled out, because it was seen a couple of people saying that actually it's always been the case that if you try and block a throw out, it's a free kick. Well, that's not really true. If you try and block a punt, yes. But remember the Karim Benzema goal from the Champions League final against Liverpool when Loris Karius, it's exactly the same. But I'm sure there's an explanation for it. I just haven't heard it. So City were quite unfortunate to be quite lucky not to be 3 down at one point. And Palace played really well.
Steve Hankey, you've written something here in the plan, haven't you? Do you want to read that out
This
yourself?
is good. I think this is good, and I don't think you should bully.
That's why I'm allowing Steve to read it out himself instead of butchering it myself.
So we were talking about Rome a second ago, and obviously the founding story of Rome is that Romulus and Remus, raised by wolves, fought each other. Romulus killed Remus, therefore named the city after him Rome. So therefore, had Remus beaten Romulus, then logically the city would have been called Reme, right?
I think that's true.
Yeah, 100%
Good
true.
joke. I wish Joe made jokes like that.
Is that a joke?
A wry observation.
Lovely observation, thank you. And I believe there's a French football team called Reims, isn't there? So, there's our link back in. Arsenal 2, 1 Fulham, John. Late goal from Gabriel, of course, after he was perhaps at fault for the...
Perhaps
for the one at the other end, perhaps at fault. Arsenal. The thing I want to ask you about with Arsenal here is, and as I said a moment ago, my wife and I have just finished watching Arsenal All or Nothing. She loved it, by the way, obsessed. She even tried to watch some Arsenal with me at the weekend. A little, when she realised that a football game wasn't 2 highlights of when the goals were, I think she lost interest a little bit. But then when we did Match of the Day, there was some more interest there. Anyway, I'm making her sound like an idiot from the 50s. Not really true. I'm worried she's going to listen to this and I'm going to get in trouble. She probably isn't going to listen. I don't think she's ever listened before. But what if she listens now because she's interested in the football now? I take it all back. I didn't mean any of it. Anyway, we've been watching Arsenal All or Nothing, and it's a very interesting time to be watching that now because of the success. Obviously, they're the only unbeaten team so far. You could see elements of the progression throughout last season. They feel now like quite a force. There are some detractors that say they've only beaten easy teams. Probably not that fair.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the comments on the video that I made at the weekend about Arsenal being top of the table after 4 were from disgruntled Spurs fans who were adamant that you know, any team would beat all of the teams that they've played so far. So
Seb
Palace,
on 150 burner accounts.
yeah, exactly. But you've got to admire his
tenacity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of not the point. Like, you would expect Arsenal to win each of those games, but would you expect Arsenal to win all 4 of those games? Suddenly you're entering the realm of like lumping up the probability, making it lower and lower and lower, right? So I think what's been so impressive for me about Arsenal is that they clearly have just way more flexibility in terms of what they can do from a tactical point of view, and that gives them the ability to respond to different opponents in different ways. And a lot of it came for me through their build-up structure. So they've had a number of different build-up structures. We know that Arsenal are going to try and play possession football. In the past season, they played fairly bog standard possession football. I thought they were pretty right side heavy. They had all of their good players over there. So they had Odegaard and they had Saka over there, and they had Cedric Suarez, who's not quite so interesting a fullback as perhaps they have on the other side, and he would swing crosses into the box. They would do a lot of build up over on the right, and they would try and isolate Martinelli on the other side, try and get him into space, get him 1v1 versus fullbacks. So you just sort of do build up on one side, try and generate a goal. If you can't do that, play it to the other side, and then hope Martinelli can do something 1v1 against a fullback. And it became a bit too predictable, I think. And so by the end of last season, we started seeing Arsenal doing a few more interesting things. So we saw an inverted fullbacks a little bit more on the other side. But this season, we've just seen they've got the system now and the structure, and perhaps most importantly, the players to be way more flexible. And why that gives you the benefit is that you can attack in different ways. You can sometimes do the stuff they were doing last season if you think a team is going to be susceptible to it. But they can also do a lot more left-sided stuff. So if you think that the opposition's the right side of their defence, as your left as you're facing as Arsenal, if they're weak, then do your build up through that phase as well. And they've been inverting their fullbacks so they can make the pitch very, very narrow and build up, and that creates space in the wide areas that can help you progress the ball in wide areas. So just lots of different things. Every single game that they played so far, and we were able to show viz from Mark Carey that showed that each game they've attacked and they focused their attack in different areas or down both sides. And that sort of flexibility, I think, has lasting effects on your results. And I think that's part of the reason why Arsenal are winning these games that maybe last season they wouldn't have won.
Well, as you say, I mean, this is the first time since the 2004-05 season that Arsenal have won their first 4 games in the league. It's also, I can't remember the statistic, but it was the first time for a while that they've come back from being 1 goal down to win. Amitai, as a Leeds fan, as a general Premier League fan, do you look at Arsenal and is your instinct to sort of think, oh, they'll up at some point?
It's good that you refer to me as a general Premier League fan, because I think that's a fairly good summary of I like being a general Premier League fan. It's a nice term.
I like it too.
God, I don't know. It's hard to say on that one because they do look genuinely very good. And like I was actually thinking about this yesterday. A lot of people ascribe certain characteristics to clubs, and the more and more that like we live in a world where we have this data available to us, and you can look at teams on a level that's not the narrative all the time.
Yeah.
Like Arsenal, for example, how often do they actually it up?
Yeah.
Is that a characteristic of a club that happens to play in North London, or did they not have the players to do what they needed to do a season or 2 ago? And therefore, when it got to the crunch point, they lost a game they needed to win, which is what teams that aren't a top 4 team do, and et cetera, et cetera. I think they'll definitely get top 4 this season. Would be my guess. It's just the way they've been playing, the like difference that Jesus and Zinchenko have made to them. I don't think they are anywhere near the level of like a title challenge, because that's why they've been able to buy Jesus and Zinchenko, is that they're not players that City need this season.
Yeah.
So like if their 2 best players are backup players at City, they have to be a cut below. But I think they'll be. Maybe definitely top 4 is a bit strong, but they should be. They should be there or thereabouts.
Okay.
Come May.
Well, we know that they play Aston Villa next, but Steve Hankels is letting me know that October, very difficult month fixture-wise for Arsenal, because of course there's the first London derby at the Emirates on the 1st of October. And following on from that, there are Europa League games against Bodo Glimt that are either side of a game against Liverpool. There's Leeds, there's Manchester City, there's away at Southampton, who've started the season pretty well. and Eindhoven, Nottingham Forest. I mean, that's a lot of games. We're going to experience this a little bit more anyway. And in fact, it's probably worth pointing out now, if you're listening to this on the day of release, there are games this evening. So we're going to see this kind of truncated season as a result of the World Cup being smash bang in the middle of it. It's a lot of games. Arsenal did a fair amount of what's the word for it? Resting players. Rotation, thank you. Which is, again, like perhaps an example of something that maybe we wouldn't necessarily have seen them doing so much last season, aside from situations where the injuries caused them to do so. So I'm very excited to watch them. I'm delighted for Gabriel Jesus as well to score so many goals and get off to such a good start. I love it. Anyway, let's have a break now. Returning from a break. Delightful. Yes. Producer Jamie there in his cubby hole, having a good time. Southampton 0-1 Manchester United. Seb, Man United, I think when we obviously last week we didn't talk about the Liverpool game because that happened on the Monday night after we'd recorded. But Erik ten Hag stuck with the same big call that he made ahead of that game, which was leaving Harry Maguire and Cristiano Ronaldo on the bench again. Appeared to have worked, obviously, in a slightly different way in this game than it did on Monday against Liverpool, Seb.
Yes, did not watch this game, Joe.
Yes. John. I hadn't been to Seb for a while. I thought now I realise why Steve Hankels put John next to this, but I was trying to disobey the authority, the order here of events.
What's the question? I've completely lost track.
Were you not listening to me either?
No, I was listening deeply, but I was like, I wonder what Seb's going to say without really thinking.
I was wondering what Seb was going to say as well. John, what I'm asking is Manchester United, Ten Hag took the same approach. He stuck with his big call that worked out on Monday, leaving Ronaldo and Maguire on the bench. It appeared to work in this game in a slightly different way than it worked against Liverpool, because Southampton, obviously, a very different sort of opponent, but they came through okay.
Southampton caused Man United a lot of problems, I'd say. And they did that by they had this really nice press off the ball where they went man for man. We've seen man for man presses cause problems for Manchester United in a couple of their games so far. So Brighton, they lost to Brighton, they lost to Brentford. Both of those teams were going man for man when Manchester United were trying to build up. And I think the realisation there was that, okay, it's really risky and aggressive to push your players man for man when a team are building up, because you leave a lot of space in behind. But I think because they realised that if they did it well, the ball would go back to David De Gea and he would just be hitting either channels or centre-backs. And because they've got like two really tall centre-backs, I think they just fancied their chances. They were like, if Manchester United can build the ball up against us, they're going to cause more problems than us just pushing forward and leaving space in behind, despite the fact that Manchester United had beaten Liverpool by playing that way.
Yeah.
Hart and Huddle got his team to half-time 0-0, and Southampton probably looked like the better team in many respects. But what Ten Hag did in the second half, he made a few tactical tweaks that just helped his team to build up. When you're playing against a man-to-man press, there's just a couple of things that you do. One of the things is that you know that if you move a player, their marking responsibility will follow them, so you can start pulling the structure apart a little bit. So they did that.
Amitai sadly nodding as a Leeds fan. He knows all about how this happens.
We've got over this. It's fine. So we can now glory in these sorts of issues. But that was what happened in the midfield area. So McTominay and Ericsson switched sides, and it caused a little bit of space, which then allowed the second thing to do, which is ball carrying, particularly from centre-backs. So Varane pushed forward. Because Aribo wasn't there to press him, it meant that Adam Armstrong pulled across, and then basically what happened was chain reaction, exactly. And from that moment, obviously it was a great finish by Fernandes, but that was one of the best moments I think we've seen from Manchester United in terms of coach possession play that showed that Erik ten Hag is having a difference. Yes, they weren't great the whole game, but when you have a coach who can make those sorts of tweaks, and he can sort of fashion situations to make it easier for you to score, you're onto a winner, and that's something that Manchester United haven't had for a while. So.
Yeah, and it's like Bruno Fernandes' lovely goal he scored in this game, and there's been a lot of talk about whether or not he will benefit from Ronaldo not being in the team. I can't work out whether this is a tactical thing or whether it is just a kind of mentality thing. What do you think from watching?
It's an interesting question, because that was always the conversation about a year and a half ago a year ago when Ronaldo first came to Man U, because people realised that for Portugal, Fernandes sometimes doesn't get on the pitch because he doesn't work well with Ronaldo, hypothetically. I actually think I thought he had quite a poor game on Saturday, but had the moment. And I think maybe that's the thing about Fernandes is he's a moments player. And like one of the things that Man U found when they first brought him in was that by relying on him to get a goal, to get them a point, 3 points, whatever it might have been, he was really useful. He scored goals, provided assists. Having someone like Ronaldo might stop that almost like pipeline of numbers.
Yeah.
And actually just not having him in the team and being like, you are the guy we're going to rely on to pop the ball in the top corner. Stop worrying about that guy up front. He's not there anymore. Actually might just be the benefit. He didn't play well, but he scored a brilliant goal. And therefore, like, that's exactly what Man U needed from him. So in a sense, just not worrying about this other person might be to his benefit.
As the captain as well. Now, Seb, the other story about Manchester United at the moment is that the fee that reportedly could be paid for Antony from Ajax, which, including all the add-ons and everything, I believe equals up to over 100 million euros. It seems like a lot of money to spend on Antony.
It sure does, Joe. Now, we've got an RL video coming out on this in the coming few days, which John wrote and presented. And I think, like, I'm a little bit prejudiced towards the Eredivisie because, like everybody else, you always feel like it's a bit of a hit and miss league. And you always feel no matter how much you spend and no matter how successful the player's been, you don't know whether you're going to get a Christian Eriksen or a Davy Klaassen, an Alfonso Alves or an original Ronaldo. So I think it's natural to feel a little bit nervous about that amount of money. I think we're also reacting to the way that Manchester United have done business in the past, which is to haggle and haggle and haggle, but end up just paying the asking price. Also, I really like watching Antony. I think he's fun. I think he's entertaining. I think he's ever so skillful. But two things concern me. First of all, he's very, very slight. Secondly, he's not outstanding, and his volume hasn't been outstanding in Holland, which when you pair that with the amount of money that United are going to spend and the expectation that's going to come from it and the kind of atmosphere into which he's going to arrive, that's a really tricky combination of factors. And I don't want to do the lazy thing of just damning it because it's United and they're bad at negotiating and because this has happened so many times before, but it feels like a manager reaching out for one of his former players, taking what he knows and being charged a premium for it because there aren't any better options available. Yeah. Fun player, don't know how good he is, don't know whether he's going to be an outstanding one. That's all.
Okay. Now, John, am I right in thinking that you've done all of this research that we're about to discuss? Or was this Steve Hankel's? Who's to blame here? Was it you?
Maybe me.
Did you waste your time on this?
I didn't waste time. I spent about 15 minutes on this.
Listeners, what happened was, you know how in a WhatsApp group people say things and occasionally there's a joke that's made that's really not worth taking any further. Somebody made the joke in the WhatsApp group that when I suggested that we contextualise the fee that's being paid for Antony, that we do so with the unit of Freddo. Now, Freddos, for international listeners who may be unaware, are very small little frogs made of chocolate that come in a wrapper, and you used to buy them for 10 pence back in the day. They're more expensive now, Freddos, of course, because of inflation and the cost of living crisis. Not that, but inflation. Although Freddos may go up. We haven't heard the latest from the government on that. But Freddos may also go up as well as... Listen, if electricity's doubling again, then maybe Freddos could be £1 by October 2023. We just don't have the information at the Tifo Football Podcast. But you appear to have worked out, not just for the Antony fee, but
Steve
also...
worked out for the Antony fee.
You guys did a combination, did you?
We're in this together. Yeah.
I'll just back out now, and you can both tell us all about this.
I agree with you that maybe using the unit of Freddos to transcribe Antony's fee is not actually that interesting, but for those who are interested, it's about 344 million Freddos for 100 euros these days.
And that's at 25p.
That's at 35p.
35p.
No, 30p. 35p? 30p.
30.
I've got the Freddo index in front of me, and I can tell you that when Freddos were re-released in the 1990s, they came out at 10p, and then they went up in 2007 to 15p, and then they went up to 20p in 2011.
What's CPI inflation?
It's consumer price index.
Oh,
yeah.
Tell me about that, Amitai.
That's it's the basket of goods, isn't it, that the average household buys?
Oh, yes.
And they work out inflation by like how much is butter and this other thing.
And Freddos.
Also, the other thing is, are you suggesting that Freddos were re-released in the 90s?
Yeah, well, I went on the Wikipedia page, and they were called Freddies.
Freddies?
And in the 90s, they were re-released as Freddos.
Well, do you remember back in the 90s when people used to put O on things because it sounded cool? Yeah,
G-O-O.
Freddos. Oreos.
Cheerios.
Before, because Oreos in the 80s were Oreos.
No,
They weren't.
Oh.
No,
There we go.
they weren't.
When did Brazilian footballers' names get so boring, by the way? Because as a kid,
Yeah.
I was like, you had Ronaldo and you had Ronaldinho, and it's like you read Shoot magazine. It's
Rivaldo,
like,
that's a
wow,
great
like
name.
look at these,
Juninho.
and then it's Fred and Antony,
Yeah.
and Everton.
It does feel odd.
Names
doesn't
that
it?
your granddad would have, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, to get back to Freddos, which is
Well,
I know is what our listeners and
no, of
dear
course.
listeners, I'm going to look at the camera now. I'm going to do a 2-camera. If you think that this is interesting, do let Joe know in the comments below. But what I was then interested, what I was then interested in was like which footballer was actually worth the most Freddos.
Well,
'cause
of
that's
course
kind
you'd be
interesting.
interested in that.
And
Yeah.
in my estimation, I reckon it's Real Madrid's purchase of Zinedine Zidane in
Right.
2001.
Yeah.
Which comes in at around, let me just find my notes for this, Joe. Comes in at around 658 million Freddos.
What do they call it when you have to defend your PhD? A viva or something?
Viva, yeah.
A viva, yeah.
Viva is, I think, the Spanish.
Viva la Viva.
Yeah, Viva la Viva.
That's a Coldplay song or something, isn't it? About
Yeah,
Chris
yeah.
Martin's PhD.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so I think that it's really interesting because what we see
It
with
really is.
Zinedine Zidane is like the peak of the Freddo purchasing power.
Yeah, the
and then it
cross-section
drops off
between
again.
transfer inflation and Freddo-related inflation.
And I think the thing to take away from this is if Real
Yeah.
Madrid had actually purchased Freddos instead of Zinedine Zidane and
Yeah.
invested them and then sold them this year, they would have made a profit after inflation of about 80 million euros.
I think if anyone has subscribed to yours and JJ's business class, then they really should be worried about the money that they've spent. I think to sell 2-decade-old Freddos.
Well, I also
You know what
looked
happens to
into.
chocolate,
I
don't
also
you?
looked into this because apparently you can store chocolate in a way that means that it doesn't. Chocolate doesn't have an expiration date, so feasibly you could actually do this. But then I was wondering.
Mackenzie-shaped wormhole. It's so weird.
Then I was wondering, like, how much money would it cost to store Freddos? That amount of Freddos, obviously.
Yeah,
like,
because
over-
there's a business
would it cost
opportunity
80
here.
million euros?
yeah, probably. So maybe we would just end up with a not a huge amount
Sure.
of profit.
Also, can I ask when you did this? Because they only confirmed the Antony feed last night.
I did it last night. I was on the case as soon as I possibly could.
Yeah, well, that's, Nottingham Forest 0 to Tottenham, Seb. Very interesting. Tottenham flying, aren't they? 8 goals in 4 games. Last season's Golden Boot son, he hasn't scored any of them, though.
Yeah, I don't know that Tottenham are flying. I think they're unbeaten.
I'm just reading what's written down here in front of me. If you've got a problem with what I've said, then take it up with Steve.
I shall take it up with Hankels after the podcast. Yeah, no, they're okay. I don't think they're anything more than that. They were yes, his form feels to me like it's been a little bit misunderstood in the sense that I saw this at Aston Villa away last season. When they get an early goal, which they did in this game, they kind of retreat behind the ball and live off their counter attack. And that's misconstrued as, you're under the caution, under pressure. And actually, if you look at the game, and if you look at the XG, Forrest didn't really create an awful lot. And Spurs defended pretty well. Deep, there are a couple of slightly misjudged moments and a few hacky clearances. But other than that, they played okay and they counter-attacked quite nicely. What I'd say is that it's a little bit profligate up front. Son, as you mentioned, not in form. And I think there's a conversation to be had about sort of just taking him out of the team for a couple of weeks. He looks like a very, very tired footballer. But also the midfield, not quite working. It's not quite balanced enough. Højbjerg's playing quite well. Bentancur's playing quite well. The combination isn't quite right sometimes. And I think there's a case to be made for Yves Bissouma coming in at some point. But
They're a bit samey at times, aren't they?
It does feel like that. Especially when they're in that mode, when they're in the kind of the drop deep and counter mindset. It looks like their patterns are very, very similar. And also, if you look back at some of the counters they had in the second half, they became quite easy to defend. So they have their pattern. They usually have one ball carrier, 2 splitting either side, and maybe a centre forward, usually Kane, possibly Kulusevski or Son, breaking ahead. And Forrest knew how to defend that. And there are a few times when they kind of forced a bad decision or forced a mistime run. And so sometimes you have to rethink the mechanic. But they're unbeaten. And as with Arsenal, I think, like we mentioned, I think Arsenal, anybody sort of denying that Arsenal have been really, really impressive, I think that's wrong, because I think you can see the kind of momentum they're able to build within games and the kind of the the strength and variation within their attacking possessions. It's super impressive. And Spurs haven't hit that gear yet. The table may say that good start, and it is, but work to be done, I think. Definitely.
I always enjoy when a team isn't playing hugely well, but still winning points. I think that's
it's very satisfying. I think the story yesterday was really. I think Forrest did play very, very well.
Yeah,
and we talked about right at the beginning about so they spent a lot of money and they brought in a very, very large number of players, unprecedented incoming transfer activity for a Premier League side. However, a lot of the players they brought are really, really good. So yesterday, a newly promoted team was able to bring Remy Fuller and Emmanuel Dennis off the bench, which is, it's quite a nice, even especially in this sort of age of 5 substitutions, pretty nice utility to have and a nice injection of quality. Dennis didn't play super well, but Freuler is a very experienced player. Like they've been able to bring Morgan Gibbs-White to the club, who looks excellent, had a really good game yesterday.
Yep.
Jesse Lingard has played ever so well for most of the season, was very, very good for an hour. Faded a little bit, but he was very good for an hour. So it's a good game. It was interesting, but seemingly the only thing that is being talked about now is the Richarlison incident, which is weird.
The kick-ups.
It's just not something to get upset about. It's very, very strange. It's kind of like a lot of old ex-professionals talking about, in my day, we used to kick 6 out of each other and that was fine, because I respected my opponent by shortening his career. Like, just like, I mean, like, it all sounds great, doesn't it? But if you're going to pitch yourself as a kind of guardian of the game, perhaps get as exercised about things that matter. Like get upset about, I don't know, bad ownership or sports washing or.
Well, indeed, can I say on that note, one of the things I took from the Arsenal All or Nothing series was, apart from Arteta's kind of like increasingly madcap ways to motivate a team by holding light bulbs and such and drawing strange pictures, one of the things I noticed that I really liked that I'd never really thought about before was how every time a player made a mistake, or there were a couple of episodes where a player got a red card, Arteta fired the teammates up by saying, let's go out and do it for that player. Instead of sort of, your assumption would be that the rest of the team would be annoyed with the player because now they have a harder extra 45 minutes or they're more likely to lose. But the idea of being motivated around hope rather than around anger, I think is nice. So every time I hear an old boy talking about how they used to clatter into each other and you have to do it like a man or whatever has been said.
But it's.
I don't like it.
Do you think it's quite weird that you've got people who played the game 40 years ago, kind of still sort of standing above it, getting annoyed about players having haircuts, and getting annoyed about, because you don't actually. I know you played the game, and at the time you played the game at a very high level. That high level doesn't bear any relation to what the game is today. Like in terms of
Sunday League, yeah.
But no, it's not that. It's not just like beyond a certain age, you should sort of. You should stop being pundit. I don't mean that at all. It's just that have the kind of humility to recognize the differences, the way that the game has changed and the way that the speed of the football has changed and also the way it's officiated have changed. And also that the people playing it and the personalities involved have changed because it is different. And there's a striking lack of acknowledgement of that, which is disappointing, I think. And the Richarlison thing is the tip of the iceberg, but it was odd because he didn't seem to humiliate anybody. What's the name of the Brazilian player who sort of ran around the field bouncing on his head? Curlon. Like he did the sort of the seal trick. That's probably taking the piss and that's probably going a little bit too far. But Richarlison juggled the ball a couple of times and laid it off backwards as Tottenham were trying to see out time.
What's the problem?
It's like
everybody can get in the bin, right in the middle of the bin.
Also,
good Lord, let's not waste any more time talking about this. It's such
right.
a nothing issue.
Absolutely.
Amitai, Dean Henderson. Actually, I'll come to you in a second. Actually, I've made a mistake about all of this. 1 second. Hold on. Yes, Amitai, Tottenham. Not Dean Henderson. Now get that out of your head. Think about Tottenham.
Okay.
You're a newsman. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed anything at Tottenham? Newsman's so funny. At Tottenham doing anything else?
See John putting on his glasses like Walter Cronkite.
Are they doing anything else in the window there, the transfer window that you know of?
Dateline, Saigon. I don't think we've particularly heard that doing anything. I think like any club, they will like do something if something comes up, but I don't think they're particularly pursuing anyone.
Fine. Well, you keep your ear to the ground. John, Dean Henderson. Yeah, and it is right this time. Dean Henderson, obviously we knew this was going to happen at the beginning of the season when Manchester United let Dean Henderson go on loan. De Gea, of course, has his foibles. Every time Dean Henderson makes a good save... Sorry.
You said foibles in a really sort of New York accent then, didn't you?
Foibles. Every time Dean Henderson makes a good save, of which he's made many, let's be clear, including a couple of penalties as well. It was inevitable that people were going to say, "Oh, Manchester United made a mistake and in letting him go." But you know, based on what we know about De Gea's limitations in an Erik ten Hag team, it's not my understanding that Dean Henderson really solves any of those problems. He's not a super proactive goalkeeper with his feet.
Yeah, I mean, Nottingham Forest and Manchester United are very different teams, right?
Sure.
So what Nottingham Forest need isn't necessarily a great ball-playing goalkeeper. They are going to be expected to have a lot of shots conceded, so they're going to need a decent shot stopper, and that's what Dean Henderson is. Like, incredible. Both the penalty saves really good. Kept them in the game that they won against whoever it was that they won, who I've forgotten about now.
Yeah.
Did they beat?
West Ham.
I wasn't listening to you.
West Ham, yeah. He kept them in that game, and had he not been playing, they wouldn't have won that game.
Right.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
But that's very different from what Manchester United need. They're not going to be having... And this is the thing, right? David De Gea was impressive when Manchester United had managers who were sitting deep, absorbing pressure, and then trying to hit on the counter-attack.
Yeah.
Because, you know, one of the byproducts of that is that you concede a lot of more shots than you do if you're trying to control the game. And that's not where Manchester United are now. So, yeah, Manchester United need a ball-playing goalkeeper. And I don't think either De Gea and Henderson are at that level.
Well, Amitai, as a newsman, have you known of any attempts from Manchester United to get a goalkeeper?
They're in the hunt for number 2, aren't they? Which is, so there was
a challenging number 2.
I don't know if that's the case.
No?
It's been Dubravka, who is good, but not world class.
Sure.
And they've made moves for Begovic.
Yeah. Oh.
And
Begovic from 2014 fantasy football fame.
And scored a goal or something.
Yeah. And Trapp.
Yes.
And so it's like it's I think it's more the realization that maybe Tom Heaton shouldn't be playing if it comes down to it. Which feels a bit unfair because he was quite good, but also if this is what Ten Hag has decided, I basically think it's more of a case of having a player in there in the event that David De Gea gets suspended or injured. But I feel like we reported a few months ago that the keeper they like a lot is Melia at Leeds, which I think is the case for actually the majority of top sides in the Premier League. So it's not going to be as simple as him going there. And that would probably be like a sensible one to look at in a year or two. But yeah, they're not.
I find that weird though, because like for me, Melia, again, a brilliant shot stopper, but like we've seen him be pretty fragile with his feet at times, especially last season, right, under Bielsa.
But isn't the thing with goalkeepers with their feet? I mean, I might be wrong in saying this, but like Lloris, I feel is like the sort of example sweeper keeper, but maybe more sweeping up than actually being good with feet. Yeah. Is any keeper actually genuinely good with their feet?
Oh, it's interesting because I spoke to a couple of goalkeeper experts about this because I don't know anything about goalkeeping really, and I was asking like, what do you think that the level of ball playing ability for goalkeepers in the Premier League is? And they were saying the average in the Premier League is probably lower than outside of the Premier League, which struck me as being very odd given that the Premier League is like one of the most technical leagues in the world. We have some of the best like teams in terms of possession play in the world as well, but they were arguing that if you actually take the average, including I guess second and third keepers, actually the Premier League doesn't have a huge amount of ball playing goalkeepers, and there are quite a few of them out on the continent at the moment.
Okay. Well, to the continent, perhaps we can look and search. I don't know why we would do that. It was my mother's birthday yesterday.
Oh, happy birthday!
Happy birthday, Mother!
Happy birthday, Joe's mum.
Do you want to hear something very embarrassing?
Always.
You forgot.
I didn't forget, no. Yeah. But I called Mother yesterday and said, happy birthday, Mother. You know, how's the old person's home? She's not an old person's home. It's just a home that she lives in on her own. And she said, having a good day. I said, I've got you a gift, Mother. It's tickets to Swan Lake, a performance of Swan Lake, the ballet, at a big theatre nearby. And she said, are you making a joke? And I said, no, why? And she said, is it on the 4th of November? I said, yes. And she said, you bought me those last year and it was delayed because of COVID. So now she has 4 tickets.
So she can take her friends from the old people's home.
I very nearly bought her tickets to the Nutcracker the night before, which would have been even worse. Because like, you got to go twice in a row to a big theatre near you to see the Nutcracker and then Swan Lake. But it's fine. She's going to take my granddad. So, you know, and presumably 2 other people.
So basically you spent twice the amount of money than...
Yeah, COVID delayed the last one, you know. But it seems fine. It was, you know, it's funny. So there's that. But it's not a good sign for my long-term memory. It's really not. It's really not. Anyway, Steve Hankles, are we done?
I think we're done.
Yeah, fine. Well, thanks for your patience and discerning aggression and authority today. You really put us in our place and told us what to do. Not really. John Mackenzie, dog, good boy.
Thanks, man.
Well done. That was too rude. It came out worse than I intended it to.
Good boy. Thank you, master.
Oh, God.
I feel as though this is a hole of your own digging, so...
Auf Wiedersehen, Sebastian Stafford-Bloor. Have a guten day, yes?
Bis gleich, Herr Devine.
Bis gleich, yes.
See you later.
And see you later. Okay, good to know. And the newsman. He can head back to the news desk. And hopefully there's plenty of good news today. Amitai Winehouse, thanks for your appearance. We love Amitai. We love having Amitai on, don't we?
Cheers for having me, Joe.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Becoming
Joe,
a
am I addressing that to you? Are you the person who...
Am I the person who's speaking now?
No, who decides? When I say thank you
decides?
for having me on, am I
Oh,
like,
sure. I don't really know. I kind of on a day-to-day basis it changes. But, you know, it's a collective willing for you to be here. And if anything, it's the audience that decided.
thank you, audience?
Anyway, to the audience, thank you, and producer Jamie and his cubbyhole. We've all had a lovely day. But enjoy yourself and enjoy the games Tuesday, Wednesday night, deadline day. Of course, we'll be back next week with more. Until then, goodbye.